Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a discontinued gem fragrance review, literally on a fragrance called Gem by the house of Van Cleef and Arpels. Now, first of all, before I even have to say a word about this fragrance, if this bottle does not take your breath away, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, these type of bottles literally stop me in my tracks. And Van Cleef and Arpels is known as one of the most amazing gem jewelry designers. They go way back. And this is a fragrance that highlights their history as a jewelry maker. I would love to get one of those Van Cleef and Arpels Alhambra bracelets or whatever, but those damn things are like $5,000 to $10,000 each, and maybe even more depending on what quality and all that stuff that you want. So they're not cheap, I'll tell you that. When people are like, I got a new Van Cleef and Arpels, it's like they're spending some dough, some real money on their jewelry. But for me, I spend my money on Van Cleef and Arpels perfume, but I got very, very lucky with this one. I'll show you on the back here in just a second. This actually came all the way from Japan. Actually, I'll show you now. So if you take a look at the back, you can see the Japanese writing on the back. And from my understanding or guess, so this fragrance came out in 1987. I think this was a one-run fragrance. I don't think this fragrance was ever reformulated. I don't think you have to worry about reformulations. I could be wrong. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing from what I've seen and just how few bottles there are out there. Like there's a handful of bottles. You can find a partial on Etsy for $250 or something. You can find pure Parfum sealed for $500. But there are not very much stock. So my guess is this was a one-run fragrance and then it got discontinued. And yesterday I reviewed probably one of the most famous fragrances from the 1980s. It came out in 1985, the year I also came out. And this is called Obsession by Calvin Klein. We started with the women's version. However, I will review the men's version as well from 86. There's really not too much of a difference. There's slight differences. There's like a red berry note in the men's. There's also a myrrh note in the men's that is absent from the women's version. And I described it to almost like petting a wolf. You know, it has this musky, powdery, soft, fur-like dry down. Hungry Like a Wolf by Duran Duran is the song that I mentioned when I reviewed Obsession yesterday. And I said, I cannot believe in almost 900 videos on YouTube, I did not review a single Calvin Klein fragrance yet. So we righted that wrong yesterday. Today, we are going to right a second wrong, which is I have not reviewed a Van Cleef and Arpels fragrance since I started this channel 2.5 years ago, which is absolutely shocking to me because SAR and Van Cleef and Arpels Pour Homme are two of my absolute favorites. There are others like Midnight in Paris and stuff like that, which I will discuss on the channel. But since we did a women's fragrance yesterday, I figured we would continue the women's trend. Sometimes I get in these moods where I just want to wear these women's fragrances. And to be quite honest, I wore this to work. And we're going to do a lot of things different in this review because this review, I really feel like just has to come from the heart. I could write little details and stuff down like I normally do, but this is literally the piece of paper I'm working with today. It is blank. This is all coming directly from the heart because this fragrance literally moves me. This is a moving fragrance. Couple things just off the top to discuss. Number one, when you buy a fragrance from Japan, the Japanese people take real pride. So if you buy a fragrance from Japan, and somebody says that there is something wrong with it, it's almost like they are attacking your honor, saying that they are selling bad fragrances. So if you're buying vintage fragrances that are partially full, if they know the fragrance is off, they won't sell it. It's not like here in the US where on eBay it's a literal minefield of just off, turn, bad fragrances that sat on someone's windowsill. It's not like that in Japan. The problem is shipping is an absolute pain in the ass. So you have to find someone who knows what they're doing. Luckily, my brother Cullen has come through for me a couple times with a couple Japanese hauls, and the prices are very reasonable. Japan is a island that's loaded with vintage perfume, loaded. And every single bottle I've ever got from Japan has been impeccable. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is that yesterday, whenever I reviewed Obsession, I said that when you smell a fragrance, you are literally smelling a smell in time, okay? You're smelling what was popular, you're smelling what the houses were competing against the other houses with, right? But also the thing is nothing is 100% unique. I've learned that in my fragrance journey. These people who stand up here and say, I've never smelled anything like this. There are situations where maybe some new molecule comes out, captive molecule, or oil from an oil house or something, and they put it in a fragrance and it does give it a very unique smell. But for the most part, what I've learned is a lot of fragrances heavily draw from the past. It's just the way that it is. It's just that most people don't know their fragrance history, so they're ignorant to it. Doesn't mean that they're stupid or wrong. It just means there's a million fragrances out there. Literally, there's probably a million fragrances. And you just can never keep up. It's impossible for one person to keep up. Even if I had a team of people working with me, it would be impossible for me to keep up. And so this fragrance falls into a similar category as one of what I would consider the all-time great fragrances. Okay, so the first thing when I smelled Gem for the very first time, the reason my heart skipped a beat is because it instantly reminded me of what I would consider one of the greatest feminine fragrances of all time. This is Rochas Femme. Now, this is the vintage Parfum de Toilette, which is discontinued, but I hear the new version is equally nice. I've done comparison videos on this. I've reviewed this on the channel, so there's lots of information on Rochas Femme if you want to look. This is an Edmund Rudnitska masterpiece, okay? Absolute masterpiece in my opinion. And if you know Rochas Femme, it came out originally in the late 1940s, okay? So right after World War II, or right during World War II, when it was ending in 1945 is when it originally came out. And Edmund Rudnitska is widely considered to be one of the greatest perfumers of all time, but Rochas Femme, I think, is a little bit of almost like a mystery for newcomers to the fragrance game, because some people, when they first come in the fragrance game, they want to categorize everything. Some things just are without categorization. Some things transcend categorization, right? This is not necessarily a Chypre. It's not necessarily an Oriental, okay? It is both. And sometimes it takes a long time for newer people to come into the fragrance game to realize that everything is subjective in one way or another. Even the notes that you're smelling on the note breakdown are subjective. Me and Jonathan and Rich Mitch were having this conversation. They are recommendations of what to smell, okay? There's no one going in there and squeezing a plum in your fragrance, okay? Or chopping up rosewood and putting it in there. They're just not doing it, okay? They're smells that the perfumer may recommend that you smell, but you may smell this and I may smell this and we may smell two completely different things. So that's the very first thing you have to learn when you really get into fragrances. Smell what you smell. No one else is going to smell with your nose except for you, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that learning about fragrances is like learning history. Many things have been done before. There's nothing new under the sun. We think we're the first civilization going through this. We are madly mistaken, okay? We may be the first civilization going through this that has an iPhone in their pocket, but we're not the first civilization going through these problems, right? It's very similar with perfume. And many perfumers are also perfume lovers like us. They're not just going to a job like grunts, with their head down 9 to 5, punching a time clock and punching out. Many people get into this hobby because they love perfume, right? So the creator of Van Cleef Arpels Gem, marketed towards women, easily wearable by men. I wore this as my scent of the day today. I'm going to do a fresh spray here in a minute, but we're going to go backwards in this review. We're going to flip it on its head. No notes, speaking from the heart, and we're going to start with the base, the dry down, because the base of this fragrance is absolutely phenomenal. So before we talk about the notes in Gem, though, one thing about Rochas Femme. This did not just influence fragrances like Gem. This, to me, also influenced one of the greatest modern Oriental Chypres of its time, which I will review on the channel very soon. I don't have a bottle, but I do have a very fat decant that you see I put a pretty good dent in. This is MDCI's Chypre Palatin. This is created by the great Bertrand Duchaufour. Chypre Palatin heavily was inspired by Rochas Femme. Heavily. There's no getting around it to me. And so if you're not familiar with Rochas Femme, it's basically this huge floral, fruity Chypre with a big oriental base. So there's ambers and benzoins and powders and patchoulis and vanillas and musks and all this stuff, right? And that smell, that scent, okay, heavily inspired what we are going to smell in the 1980s. There were even some people, I mentioned this yesterday in my Obsession review, but there are even some people that were mentioning this is a futuristic smelling Chypre. And you know what? Does it have the labdanum? Probably. Does it have the oak moss? Absolutely, especially the vintage. Does it have the bergamot on the top? Yes, but would I call this a Chypre? No, I'd call this a oriental to me. This is much more powders, resins, vanillas, all that good stuff, right? And musks, lots of sensual animalic musks. In my review, I mentioned the best line, the best descriptor for Obsession I ever heard is that it's literally like you have a third wheel, a third passenger sitting right next to you. If it's you and your girlfriend hanging out, Obsession is so powerful that it's almost like there's another entity there with you. It has that sort of aliveness, it comes alive when your body heat comes alive, right? And it really is the smell of the 80s for many people. But the reason is also, and I mentioned this in my review yesterday as well, is that there are those type of fragrances from the 80s that also came out previously to Obsession and after Obsession. So I mentioned before, we had things like KL by Lagerfeld and KL Homme, which came out the same year as Obsession for Men. And then before we had Lagerfeld Cologne for Men, which really, I think, was the big entry point into that sort of powdery genre, orangey, powdery, ambery genre. Lagerfeld Cologne uses much more tobacco and stuff like that. But and then in the early 90s, we had Crazy Krizia, which really was a Dominique Ropion, who's a master perfumer now. People pay over $1,000 for his fragrances with Frederic Malle, and sometimes you can still find bottles of Crazy Krizia for 50 bucks, right? Just amazing value for money. This one is going to be a little harder to find, okay? But if you want a comparison, if you want me to kind of place it for you, imagine you're smelling something that is closest to Rochas Femme, but brings in these extra floral bits and pieces here and there, almost in the same range as something like Ysatis by Givenchy, okay? If you've smelled Ysatis, it is a huge party. I mean, there's just notes everywhere, lots of amazing, decadent, dripping florals. I heard someone describe this once as like being at a buffet, and every single note was available, and you could just pick it up and smell it and hold it, and the intricacy and the detail, okay? So with Gem, here's the note listing, and Roger Pellégrino is the perfumer, by the way. He is a little bit of a icon, okay? He made things like Giorgio Armani's Eau pour Homme from '84. He made One Man Show by Jacques Bogart, which the vintage is amazing, the modern is shite to me. He made KL Lagerfeld, which is one of the fragrances. Let me just grab it so I can show you again. If you have not watched my Obsession video, I showed this on the Obsession video, but he made this, which in many ways I think was an inspiration for something like Obsession, okay? And in many ways, this DNA intertwines with Gem. So if you think about something like Rochas Femme with that Chypre combination of big floral heart, bergamot in the top, labdanum in the base, and usually some patchouli, and then this oriental sort of, almost like it's just stapled on. This oriental heavy accord is stapled onto this Chypre style, and you get lots of ambers and resins and powders and vanillas and all that good stuff, right? He also made Cacharel's Anai, which I know is a huge hit with the ladies in the late 70s. That came out in 1978. I've never smelled that yet, but I would like to. He also made Macassar by Rochas, which I have a comparison video between vintage Macassar and modern Macassar, or Macassar, however you want to say it. So the guy has not released a huge amount of fragrances, but what he has released have been hits. Every single one has been hits. It reminds me a lot of Ron Winograd. Everything that guy did was just hit, 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 hit. He never missed. It was like he was playing Battleship, and every single shot he took hit. And that's kind of how I feel about Roger Pellégrino. This is one special fragrance, though. I will tell you that. Very rarely do I get this excited about a fragrance, but every time I've worn this, I've been stunned by it. You know, and to be fair, I do think this is one of the greatest fragrances of all time. I think this is one of Edmond Rudnitska's greatest creations. I think that if it wasn't for Eau de Hermes, I would probably say this is Edmond Rudnitska's greatest work. And you can still find bottles of this for 30 bucks, is what's crazy. And they're still in decent condition, from what I hear. They're not the vintage, but they're still in very decent condition, okay? So that lays the framework for you understanding Van Cleef & Arpels Gem. Now, the fact that I think it was a one-run fragrance tells me that it probably didn't do that well in sales, is my guess, okay? It probably did not do that well. I don't know for sure, but my guess is it probably didn't do that well. Parfumo considers it a spicy floral fragrance. I would consider it a Oriental Chypre, or Chypre Oriental, however you want to describe it. But here's the note listing. Coriander, cardamom, myrtle, cypress, plum, rosewood, and peach. With a heart of clove, jasmine, tuberose, carnation, orris root, rose. So clove, rose, jasmine, tuberose, carnation, orris root, ylang, and iris. So if you've smelled Ysatis, you're probably instantly thinking of that huge decadent floral bouquet like I was mentioning earlier, with a base of oak moss, vetiver, amber, civet, patchouli, and vanilla. Okay, so that is the journey. That's the note listing. And the reason that I'm starting with the base is I sprayed this maybe about an hour before lunch. So let's say 11 o'clock. It's 6:20 right now. Okay, so it's deep into the dry down, and it is absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. I mean, the sort of powders that I'm getting right now, the ambery powderiness. What's amazing is, to me, is that many people describe this sort of amber powdery dry down as like fuzzy, fizzy, not fizzy, but maybe like like imagine in the dry down you just get nondescript like ambers, toffee, vanilla, that kind of thing, right? Ambery Oriental style dry downs, right? And many times it turns almost smeared, like someone took the fragrance and just smeared it, and all the notes just kind of smell like nondescript, right? That would be a good way to describe it. The notes just smell nondescript and everything blends together. Gem never does that for me. Almost never. It goes into the dry down just as crystal clear as the top. It may not be as heavy. It may not be as strong. It may not be as potent as when you first spray. And this is an 80s fragrance. Remember, it was competing with Giorgio Beverly Hills, with the Obsessions, you know, with these heavy, with Poison, with Dior Poison, right? So it was competing with these 80s powerhouse fragrances, and Gem by Van Cleef & Arpels absolutely held its own. It absolutely held its own to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the fragrance further, but before we do that, I just want to read a little interesting facts on the house of Van Cleef & Arpels. Since I have never actually done a video on them, I think it's a good move to just kind of do a quick intro to the house, because it's a house you're going to hear more about. You're definitely going to hear about Midnight in Paris, SAR and Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme. Those are my two favorites of all time, okay? So it says, the company philosophy of the jewelry house Van Cleef & Arpels consisted of only one word: luxury, i.e. gem. All products, designs, materials, and functions are geared towards this goal, and because Van Cleef & Arpels combines this effort with an unusually high level of craftsmanship, the brand today enjoys a very high reputation worldwide. That is true. I mean, you'll hear about Van Cleef & Arpels in fucking rap songs and shit, right? They are all over. People love Van Cleef & Arpels. They're just expensive as hell. The brand was founded back in 1896, where luxury and style are at home in Paris. The two company founders, Salomon Arpels and his son-in-law, Alfred Van Cleef, were able to attract attention with extraordinary jewelry, watch, and fragrance creations. They won over their discerning clientele with new techniques in gemstone working, creating entirely new design collections. At the same time, they deliberately opened their boutiques in places where their clientele also liked to stroll. Thus, the death of Salomon Arpels in 1906 led to the opening of the brand's first fine boutique directly opposite the famous Ritz. In the years that followed, other locations such as Vichy, Nice, and Monte Carlo were added. The high art of jewelry making made some of the most important personalities of the 20th century customers of Van Cleef & Arpels. For example, Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, Eva Perron, and the Duchess of Windsor enjoyed shopping there. Well, sure, I would too if you had an unlimited budget. For Queen Nazli of Egypt and for the Empress Farah Pahlavi, Van Cleef & Arpels even created the coronation crown in each case. So they're royalty, and they chose Van Cleef & Arpels to create their crown, right? That gives you an idea of kind of where they sit. They are jewelers. And that's what makes this fragrance so perfect, I think, sort of for the house itself. I think the name, the setup. I mean, again, let me just show you the bottle. It is absolutely stunning. And this right here comes off, and it's almost like a diamond ring, you know, on like a woman's hand, like a badass gem. It's a splash, as you can see. but the juice is in impeccable quality. And so you can see the 82 proof down there, eau de toilette. It wears like a heavy eau de parfum, I'll tell you that. It almost wears like it almost starts off like a eau de parfum and almost feels like in the dry down it wears like an extra. It's very, very thick and heavy and resinous. Since 1999, the brand has been under the direction of Campagne Financière Richemont SA. That's a big conglomerate, big global conglomerate, okay? So their fragrances in the modern times have been, I would say, a letdown. I feel like the house has got away from their roots of what they used to be back in the day, but this is a great example of why they were kind of so special, okay? Oh, also Van Cleef and Arpels First. That's another one that I'll talk about on the channel sooner or later. I do have a vintage box bottle set somewhere. I think Jean-Claude Elena did first, so you'll be hearing more about that. But definitely a fragrance house that you will be hearing more about. So the dry down, like I said, the reason I'm so captivated by it is you get that sort of ambery dry down. Obviously, you get this Oriental style dry down, and the patchouli adds weight. There's patchouli, there's vanilla, there's civet. So it is slightly animalic. The other fragrance which kind of comes to mind, and I think you have to mention, because we're talking about the 1980s, is Coco. So I just want you to imagine this sort of melange of fragrances. Imagine taking something like Rochas Femme from the 40s, which is an all-time classic, and the floral bits of Ysatis, the heaviness of Poison, and sort of the glamour of Coco, of Chanel Coco, the pizzazz, some of that. And you stick it in here, you mix it all up, all right? You mix it up with the stopper on, and you have Gem. Gem is this just amazing. And so I'm going to spray it because I want to experience the top again with you guys, but I don't think I've ever smelled a fragrance that this is my spray techniques. My God, man, just in absolute heaven wearing this stuff. And you know, as a guy, I have no problem wearing this to the office at all. I just decant it and I just bring it with me and spray it however and wherever I want. So, you know, what do you even say? It's so beautiful. So in the opening, it almost feels like you pick up some of the spices right from the get-go. So you get spicy carnation, you get a little bit of the clove, but it's not too much. If clove is one of those notes that kind of puts you off, clove has the ability to put some people off. Some people do not like clove, but I'm a fan. I like that warm, spicy element that it adds to it, and instantly you're going to get, and maybe one of the reasons that it reminded me instantly of Femme by Rochas is that you're going to get that plum. And there's two fruits in here. You noticed I mentioned that there's plum and there is peach, okay? And so you're going to get plum heavier, though. That's the thing. So the peach sets it apart a little bit from Rochas Femme. I don't think there's any peach in Rochas Femme. I think it's focused on the plum note. So you'll get both. You'll definitely get this decadence. You know, the 80s was all about this decadence, this over, you know, you're going to go overboard. You're going to go all out. Obsession, in Obsession, one of the writers wrote that it smells like sexy, but in a trashy way. That's a great way to describe, I think, the genre and what was going on in the 80s. Everything was about bigger hair, bigger shoulder pads, bigger fragrances, because remember, in the 80s, they were competing with the car exhaust without catalytic converters and people smoking indoors and all that stuff. So the fragrances had to be huge. And my God, man, it is so good. So the way that the spices, the floral, oh, there's also cardamom in the top. So you're going to get cardamom, and one of my favorite notes as far as woods go is actually a rosewood smell. And there's something about rosewood, because my mom used to have she used to have like a rosary that we would pray on Easter when I was a little kid that came back from the Holy Land. And rosewood supposedly has hints of citruses, grapefruits, petitgrain. Petitgrain is like the twigs and stigs of the orange tree. But it also has this deep, rich woodiness. And, you know, if you just think about the color, the color of rosewood, rosewood is just a beautiful note. I absolutely adore it. It's one of my favorite wood notes. It's in both Femme and Van Cleef Arpels Gem. Actually, you know, I think Femme may also have a peach and a plum note, but plum is always the note that I pick up most in Femme. And I think that's kind of the way. Maybe plum just dominates the peach for whatever reason. But instantly when you smell it, you're going to get the quality of the florals. So almost straight from the get-go. Yes, you're going to get the spices. You're going to get the fruity notes. You're going to get the dense, opulent thickness. You're going to tell instantly that this fragrance has depth. You know, it has density, right? It is a thick, it's a thick girl, okay? This is a thick girl right here. She is dense, she's thick, and she has some heft, some weight to it. And I think it's just the blending of the heavier vanillas, ambers, all that stuff in the base, but you get it from the beginning. Even though it's from the base, you get it from the beginning. So imagine all these amazing fragrances that you're kind of smelling, right? If you know vintage fragrances, your mind is going to go back to Rochas Femme, which is a Chypre. It's going to go back to the Oriental side of things. Like I mentioned, imagine the Oriental Chypre combination. But it's also going to give you some of the powders from the 80s. So like I said, these houses are paying attention to each other. Roger Pellégrino created KL, which is one of the earlier adapters of this style. This is 82. This is 85, right? And so he knows the trend. He knows Obsession was a huge hit. By 87, Obsession was everywhere, right? He knows about Coco, which I'll review on the channel one of these days. And so all of that is being taken into account. But there's one final fragrance that you have to almost mention. You cannot mention Gem without mentioning this. And that fragrance is none other than Mitsouku. So when I wear Gem, sometimes I get these elements of all of these fragrances. Sometimes I don't get them all in one wearing. Sometimes when I wear Gem, it'll remind me more of the plum note in Rochas Femme, or the Oriental style in the base, or the florals of Ysatis, or just the density and the thickness of Poison, you know, the poison apple. One of the best marketing techniques. Obviously, this is also a huge plum and tuberose, narcotic tuberose. You'll kind of get the Oriental orangey powdery elements of KL and Obsession, but you'll also get sort of the Chypre elements of Mitsouku. That contrast, that brilliant contrast between the vanilla, the Guerlain in the base, and the Chypre construction. You know, especially because of the peach note, and you just can't get away from it. I mean, that peach floral combination with the spices, and there's oak moss and vetiver in both fragrances. There's almost like this cinnamon aspect. Even though there's no cinnamon in Gem, there's almost like this spicy cinnamon feel, if you will. But the florals are, I mean, this is why I love vintage perfume. This is why my heart is with vintage perfume. It's really one of the reasons why I have such a hard time dealing with modern perfumery. It's funny because Rich Mitch and I were talking the other day, and he said, I'm kind of sad because I think I might be done. And he was like, I'll never be done talking about fragrances, but I think I'm honestly done spending my money on the crap that's coming out nowadays. There's just nothing there for me. The great part about vintage fragrances is it always seems like no matter how many you have, there's always more to explore. There's always some fragrance you've never smelled, some, you know, path to go down, some trail to follow, you know, some lead to flip over and see if it's legit. And there's just so many fragrances out there. This is a great example. Almost no one talks about Gem, but I just mentioned Gem in retrospect to some of what I would consider to be some of the greatest feminine fragrances ever created. Mitsouku, Ysatis, Poison, Rochas Femme, Coco, KL, and Obsession are the ones that I mentioned. And Gem kind of plays in that, but it doesn't just blur the lines. Remember, I started in the dry down, and I said that The dry down is so, yes, it's powdery. Obviously, when fragrances, many times when they dry down to that nondescript. You know, it just feels like everything is blurred. And even though it plays in all of these kind of sandboxes, it doesn't just blur the sand. It doesn't just blur the lines. It doesn't just, create a child's sort of hand painting and mix all the colors together, because that doesn't create anything but this, boring brown, right? When you mix all the colors together. This somehow keeps all of the details. And when I reviewed Obsession, I said some of the details of Obsession kind of revolved around the main accord, which is that fur-like, musky, ambery dry down, but all of the green basil, the peach, the details revolved around the outside. This one wears completely different. Actually, if you twisted my arm right now and you said, Ramsey, which one is your favorite, Gem or Obsession? And I loved wearing Obsession yesterday. I won't lie. I absolutely loved it. I would pick Gem. I think Gem is more to my personal liking because it brings in the Chypre element, which I love. I love how complex Chypres are. That's why I think many people, when you've been in the game for a while, they start to lean towards the Chypre genre because that gives them so much to smell. There's so much to smell. With Gem, you have you notice one thing I didn't mention was citruses in the top. I didn't mention any citruses. This doesn't give you any room to begin. This just hits you. I mean, it's literally like, you're at a restaurant and you just get down on one knee and propose and all the world is just kind of flowing at you, at once. Right? Everything is going super fast. You can't remember anything, but you're in the moment and you're sweating and you're nervous and you're, right? This kind of just begins like that. Just like the diamond on the top, right? Like I said, it could be a fat ring on some woman's finger because they're jewelers. And this just kind of wears like that. It doesn't just slowly, there's nothing to lead you into it. This just bam, hits you. And the other thing I should mention is in the top, there are a couple other notes which I was remiss in mentioning. One is myrtle. Myrtle is sort of this green, camphoraceous, herbal-like smell. Some say it is similar to, it's kind of like a take on eucalyptus, menthol resonated, that kind of thing, with this lemony type smell. So I guess myrtle does give you a little bit of the lemony smell. I mentioned the rosewood can sometimes have this citrusy like quality. Rosewood can sometimes give off citruses and grapefruit like smell, but there's no citruses, so it really just hops right into it. This lets you know that this fragrance is heavy from the get-go, right? This fragrance is putting on weight. This is a colossal fragrance. And the fact that it can bring in these elements that remind me of what I would consider maybe the greatest fragrance of all time, with Mitsouku, right? Maybe one of the greatest Edmund Rudnitska creations of all time. Definitely one of the greatest in my opinion. And to bring in all of these little details, but do it in a way where, like for me, the other thing is, I totally forgot to mention, this has a cypress note in there. Okay, and cypress is mostly seen in traditional masculine perfumery. So, you think about cypress, and there's there's a Tom Ford, Italian cypress. I reviewed it on the channel. Someone sent me a very generous decant. Many cypress fragrances you're going to see, vintage masculine fragrances, over and over and over. Encre Noir has a cypress note. Sycamore, Bracken Man, has a cypress note. It's used in a lot of incenses. It's used in a lot of masculine fragrances. Eau de Beau has a cypress note. Lots of cypress notes in masculine perfumery. So in the top of this, even though it's marketed towards women, and even though I think if you put this under the nose of many men, they would probably say that this is a woman's perfume because it does have a little bit of a perfumey smell because of that huge floral heart. And they're probably going to say it's going to lean feminine. I have no problem wearing this. If you are a perfumista or a perfume head, whatever you want to call yourself, right? And you know fragrances and you've been sniffing fragrances for a while, don't let the fact that this is marketed towards women put you off at all. I have no problem wearing this at all, even though this has tuberose in it, and tuberose can sometimes have this real heady narcotic feel. It can make the fragrance feel huge. Remember, it was competing against poison. And that's why I said there is a little bit of even the heaviness, the heftiness of poison. God, that milky floral with the spicy carnation. By the way, there's iris in here as well. It smells extremely high class. Some of these vintage irises, they smell way better than the modern iris. They smell like such higher quality to me. And when it dries, it doesn't just dry to a boring ambery toffee vanilla. It doesn't. You know, the details are there. I mean, I'm in love with Gem. Absolutely in love. This was one of the best, and I think I got this for under $100. This entire 100 ml splash, under $100. I think it was maybe missing a little bit, and I decanted most of this. So, I mean, and just look at the bottle. I mean, the craftsmanship to make this type of bottle, you can see it may not look that hard, but actually creating a fragrance bottle with this shape, Russian Adam was telling me whenever he created his so whenever Russian Adam created his History of Oud collection, he tried to make this bottle shape right here. You can see it right in the center, right here with this, and he mentioned how hard it was. They had to settle on this design with the base because it is not easy to make a bottle like this. So Van Cleef & Arpels really lived up to their jewelry status with this one. And I'm going to try to make the thumbnail, one of the advertisements. Badass. It is... it's almost like a woman sitting on what looks like to be like a Van Cleef & Arpels safe. And almost like she opened it up and she's holding this. Like she almost stole it out of the safe. She's like, you know, holding this like it's the actual gem out of the safe. And it is a gem. This is an actual gem. The reason that it's going to be in the discontinued gem category and not the Vintage Hall of Fame category is the Vintage Hall of Fame category for me are fragrances that kind of really set the tone or influenced an entire generation, or like Obsession to me was like the smell. Many people say that was the smell of the 80s, okay? Or for example, Antaeus, right? Just a monster. My reference Castoreum fragrance. And there's go watch my review if you're interested in checking out more of that. But many fragrances that I would say influenced fragrances in a way that they have to be honored, like a Hall of Fame, one of the greatest fragrances. Maybe not the greatest in terms of sales, because then it would all be Acqua di Gio and all that shit that I don't consider those Hall of Fame fragrances to me, because they're also ones that I have to love. That's the other criteria, of course. And so this to me, even though the smell and the way it wears is good enough to be in the Vintage Hall of Fame, I'm putting it in the discontinued gem because there were fragrances that kind of came before that it really drew inspiration from. But for a vintage perfume head, this is one that sadly gets left off, sadly. And since we're on a woman's kick with doing Obsession yesterday, and we're going to stay on the woman's kick today, maybe we'll stay with the women's kick tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see what I feel like wearing tomorrow. But I could not believe that I had not reviewed a Van Cleef & Arpels on the channel. That wrong is righted today. So 2 wrongs back to back. Calvin Klein and Van Cleef & Arpels. First reviews on the channel yesterday and today. So if you have experience with this gem, literally, let me know what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, the fragrance rabbit hole goes deep. So as a vintage head, there's so much to learn, so much to smell, so much to uncover, so many links, you know, so many inspired by fragrances. And that's one of the beauties of this hobby. I think it really is one of the finest hobbies. You know, these poor people who are putting up new videos about every 1,000 Middle Eastern colognes that are, you know, being issued now. They're not enjoying, they may have a YouTube channel that is making them money. They may be paid by those houses to do the videos, but they don't have the love and enthusiasm about fragrances like we do when it comes to vintage fragrances. They just don't. And you can see it in their eyes when they make these videos. They're just dead inside because they're dealing with shite. They're dealing with useless Middle Eastern clones. And for me, this is an art form, and I want to get to know and wear and explore what I consider to be the greatest fragrances of all time, not just rush to put out the video because it's the newest and best thing. That'll never be this channel. I would love to put out new fragrance content on stuff I find worthy. Like, I can't wait to talk about the new Epona by Papillon. I love talking about the Arige Ladore Musks collection, that kind of thing. But, you know, it's on a different level. That's the thing. But there's so much to learn from the past. So many fragrances that even I haven't smelled. I mean, going back through, and I've been in the fragrance game hard for over a decade, and there are so many vintages. I was looking the other day at my wish list. So many fragrances I would love to have in the collection. So just Guerlain. You could just take Guerlain. Chypre 53, Cuir de Russie. You know, I would love a bottle of Jedi and all of these amazing rare fragrances from the past. You could just take Guerlain. I could probably spend the rest of my days trying to hunt down rare and vintage and hard to find Guerlains, and that's one house. So you add in the Cotis, the Parfum d'Orsay's, on and on and on and on. I mean, literally it goes on and on and on. So, pleasure doing these videos for you guys. I hope you learned something today. This was literally off the cuff. I had 0 notes. Usually I have notes to reference and stuff like that, but this one, I just spoke from the heart. So, I hope you guys appreciated this discontinued gem review of Gem by Van Cleef Arpels. Let me know what you think in the comments. Love seeing your faces. Love doing the videos for you guys and making this type of content. It's truly a pleasure and an honor. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.